Dave, it's good to have you back. We got the opportunity of spending a couple of days here in Chicago together, and it's nice because twice or three times a year we end up at the same event, whether it's your event or someone else's, and it gives a chance to catch up. But for the listeners that are new, talk a little bit more about the Power of Zero and what you do before we get into the economic outlook.
Yeah, I think that the overarching premise of my particular financial movement, I would say, is that the numbers don't lie. We believe that we're marching into a future where tax rates are going to have to rise dramatically, or we could go broke as a country. This is not my opinion. I'm drawing from testimony from important experts like former Comptroller General of the federal government, David Walker. There's a recent study out of Penn Wharton that says that we've got to dramatically raise revenue, dramatically reduce spending, or some combination of the two by 2043, which is when the debt to GDP is about 200%. And if we fail to do either one of those by 2043, then no combination of raising taxes or reducing spending will arrest the financial collapse of our country. So we're marching into a future where tax rates have to go up. And this flips the traditional paradigm on its ear, which is that, say, pile money into your 401ks and IRAs, get deductions at today's tax rates, postpone the payment of the taxes on those dollars till a point in the future when presumably tax rates will be lower. Well, this is telling us just the opposite. There is a high chance that your tax rate in retirement could be dramatically higher than you thought it was. Therefore, what can you do between now and then to shield yourself from an inevitable raise in taxes down the road? So that's really the premise of, for example, the Power of Zero. And that's really the warning cry I've been raising as I speak all across the country.
And it's really what drives the economic outlook. And what we're going to talk about today is the impact that some of these how we're going to get to that point, how we're going to get to the higher taxes, and what it's going to take to get us there. What's happening in our country to help us better understand why this could be a very real situation for many of us as we go through those retirement years. I know one of the big topics that's talked about quite a bit right now as we look at where the debt's at is the debt to GDP ratio. You want to talk a little bit about that, Dave?
Yeah, debt in and of itself is not the problem. If you went up to, a guy like me or you, Dave, and said, oh, you've got $1 billion in debt, that would be invariably fatal to your financial life. If you went to Bill Gates and said, you've got $1 billion of debt, he'd say, so what? I'm worth 100 billion. And, so my debt to GDP is, 1% or what have you. So it's really about the debt in relation to our country's gross domestic product. And do we have the capacity to service the debt, to pay the interest on the money that we're sort of renting, the money that we've already spent, but that we continue to pay interest on over time. And so experts say that when you get past 75% debt to GDP, that starts to exert an eroding influence on your economic output over time. And you can get to a point, so that's sort of the lower end of the range where you have to worry about the debt to GDP. There's a higher range, a top end, where if your debt to GDP gets too high, then it can be cataclysmic for your country. And so I mentioned the recent the recent Penn Wharton study, and basically they said that when you get to about 200% debt to GDP, that happens based on the current fiscal trajectory. That happens in about 2043. They say that it could, really bad things could start happening when you get to 175% debt to GDP. That happens in about 2040. So what does that mean? That means we have anywhere between 15 to 19 years to sort of get our fiscal house in order before things start getting really nasty. So we've got this window of opportunity within which to fix the problem. And here's the issue. Every year that goes by where you fail to put, to permanently solve, rein in spending or permanently solve the shortfall in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that window within which to act starts to narrow dramatically, and the fix becomes more austere, more draconian. The rise in tax rates even more dramatic. The reduction in spending, deeper cuts. And so it's not like you can keep kicking the can down the road. There comes a point in time beyond which you can no longer kick the can down the road. And I think that America needs to be cognizant of it. And I think that people who are looking to wring the most efficiency out of their after-tax retirement dollars, I think that they need to be aware of this window, because every year that goes by where we don't see a headline that says Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid dramatically cut or tax rates dramatically raised, every year that goes by where we don't see one or both of those headlines means that the fix on the back end is going to be it's going to exert that much more pain on the typical American.
And you mentioned David Walker. He brought this forth originally in his first book in 2008 called Come Back America. And then he doubled down during the pandemic. I had the opportunity of having him on my show. I know you've had him on your show many times. Great guy, understands the fiscal side of America probably as well as anybody. Wrote a new book called America 2040, Still a Superpower. In fact, when I had him on my show, I stopped at that. And he says, no, Dave, you've got to add the question mark. It's got to be a question mark
at the end. Still a superpower? Right.
Question mark. Yeah. And so it's just pushing it. And obviously he's looking at this data and saying, we've got a math problem. I know for me, when I really started tracking this was about 2019, 2020. It's when you and I got together and started working heavily with you and following the concepts that you were teaching. And we were at about a $21 trillion debt at that time. I remember first slide I put together, it's $21 trillion. I know you've been talking about this longer than I have. Today we're 35, somewhere in the 35 range. Where did it start for you when you first started tracking this?
I believe that when I first heard of David Walker was probably in the 2010 range. And I think that the debt back then was 10 trillion. And David Walker, when he was interviewed on 60 Minutes during his fiscal wake-up tour, he says, the truth is we don't face an immediate crisis. We can continue to kick the can down the road. And we are technically still at a point when, where politicians can continue to kick the can down the road. But like I said, there comes a point in time beyond which you can no longer kick the can down the road, and you just don't have any options left. You can paint yourself into a corner such that you just have to sort of face the music, and the country's chickens have come home to roost. That day of reckoning is upon you. And so really, my hope is that not just Americans who have the lion's share of their retirement savings and types of accounts like 401ks and IRAs that they haven't paid a tax on yet, not just Americans. I'd like to, raise a warning cry to our elected officials who continue to spend money hand over fist to grow the debt, refuse to rein in spending, and refuse to even discuss modifying Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, let's face it, Dave. We've managed to accumulate $34 trillion of debt without even making the first step towards making Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid solvent, fully funded. I mean, that's a $200 trillion unfunded obligation, and we've managed to accumulate $34 trillion, $35 trillion of debt without even touching the problem. So it only gets worse from here on out unless we can put some dramatic fixes in place.
The pandemic obviously added major issues because it increased the debt so much, but we've also got another demographic going on out there that's going to cause problems as we look to it, and that's the baby boomers. Talk a little bit about the impact they're going to have on our future liabilities and some of the challenges we're going to face.
Yeah, well, like I said, we managed to accumulate $35 trillion of debt without addressing the baby boomer issue. And the baby boomer issue is that, baby boomers had a lot more children than their parents did. I'm a Gen Xer. My mom was one of the very first baby boomers. She was born January 17, 1946. The problem is baby boomers didn't have nearly as many children. I'll make sure I said that right. Baby boomers didn't have nearly as many children as their parents did. They had almost 30 million fewer children. So we have somewhat of a demographic time bomb. So we just don't have enough people in our country, enough taxpayers, enough people paying into Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid to support this monolithic block of Americans that we call the baby boomers, 78 million strong, leaving the workforce to the tune of 10,000 per day over the course of the next decade. And as those baby boomers leave the workforce, and move on to the roles of the entitlement programs, they're going to stop putting money in, they're going to start taking money out. And so you have this big inverted pyramid where you have lots of people that have expectations of drawing benefits, but you just don't have enough money paying into the program from the likes of me and you. And so this is an issue, and it's a massive underfunding of some major promises that politicians have made to Americans. And so I think Social Security is relatively an easy fix, but as David Walker says, Medicare is 5 times more expensive over time. And so that's a tougher fix. It's more expensive. Inflation for Medicare is higher than inflation for the cost of bread and for the cost of gas, so on and so forth. So these are tough, intractable problems. Politicians want to get elected. And when they touch that third rail of politics, which means they're trying to modify in some way Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they tend to get voted out of office. And it happens over and over and over again. So they're very reluctant to even address it. So what will likely happen is they'll continue to kick that can down the road where they can't kick it down the road any further, and they'll be forced to make some really, really tough decisions that will have long-lasting impacts on people who are looking to wring the most efficiency out of their retirement savings.